Ephesians 2:10 says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, to do good works, which God prepared beforehand, that we may walk in them." Today, we begin a series on Christian creatives. We will be talking to artists, musicians, writers, and many others about how their faith intersects with their work. We're kicking off the series with Alice Drew and Deidre Tao, two artists based in Boston. We're going to be talking with them about their creative expression and the role of the Holy Spirit in their journey. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Deirdre and Alice, thank you so much for coming on the program. I can't wait to get started with you guys. You are kicking off our series on Christian creatives. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask, both of you, is how does your faith intersect with your work? I'm going to turn it to you, Deirdre. Tell us a little bit about your art, and maybe take us back to when you were thinking about a career as an artist. How did that come about? And, how does your faith play into your decisions and your art?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so I decided as a pretty young child that I wanted to pursue a career in art. And I think the clincher for me, I'd been thinking about it, and my art teacher and I were really close. And I think the clincher was that I went to an art opening at an art school. There was a teacher there who was having a special opening of his prints. He was a printmaker. And I was like maybe 10 years old. Mm. And when I went to this opening, I couldn't believe the amount of people that came to the reception, the amount of artwork that was up in the gallery. And my family went together. It was just like a special event, and I could see and meet the artist, and he shook my hand. And I think just seeing a real person in real life doing this for a living as an art teacher and showing his artwork really inspired me. Mm-hmm. That was a turning point for me. Yeah. And then, later in high school, I really seriously pursued putting together a portfolio with an AP class, AP art, and then I applied to an art college at a state university, and that was how I sort of got my start.
That's really great. That's a beautiful story, Deirdre. Now tell me a little bit, Alice, about your trajectory as an artist.
I can tell you a little bit about how it started.
Sure.
To Deidre. My dad was our art teacher in high school, middle school and high school art teacher. So we grew up around it. We would go to art museums. We didn't always go to amusement parks. We would go to art museums. And my dad would go so slowly by every painting, and we had already gone through the whole exhibit. But just learning that and nurturing that was a really big part of our upbringing. I knew I always wanted to be an artist. Just because I saw my dad do that really well. Yeah. But he was a middle school, high school art teacher, and I said, that is not going to be anything I'm going to do. I almost had a conversation with God. I'm like, I will do college, but I don't want to teach middle school, because I saw my dad have to deal with it from a public school perspective. And it was just the school and, how I just didn't see my future. I went to Houghton College for studio art, but I majored in ceramics. Mm-hmm. I took ceramics and painting one at the same semester, but I had to choose a concentration. Mm-hmm. And I had to choose one, so I chose ceramics. I loved the material. I just loved working with clay, the wheel, hand building, everything, the responsiveness of the material I loved. And so I said, I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills, because I was actually a graphic design major at the time, because that was the late 90s and everyone was a graphic designer or moving in that direction, and you thought you could get a job like in magazines or something. Right. Nobody really knows them. People don't really get magazines as much anymore, right? It's all digital. But I thought, I don't care how I'm going to pay the bills. I want to do this. And so, but as a studio major, like you would know too, Deidre, you have to take all the prerequisites. So you have to take drawing and printmaking and sculpture. So you're kind of introduced to a bunch of different mediums. Ceramics was what I stuck with, and I went to get my MFA in ceramics at RIT, and I was a ceramics professor about 9 years. And then I had a studio practice for a while, and then we had kids, and my studio space got smaller and then turned into my children's bedrooms. And teaching full-time I've been able to do more drawing and do more painting like I've been wanting to. And it's a lot easier as a mom right now. Having a ceramic studio outside of the house is also costly. It's expensive, and I don't have time to dedicate to that. It's a different kind of a space and working environment. So I've been focusing more on painting and drawing, which is more something that I can work within with how our family is. And I love painting and I love drawing, so I'm focusing on those two right now.
Now, tell me, how does your faith play into your art, Deidre?
So I became a believer when I was 29 years old. So I had already started, my art training, my studio practice, my career, and it's very interesting how it intersected with my faith. So I would say that prior to becoming a believer, this was the year 2000 when I had my new birthday. So, so it's easy to remember. So prior to that, I really was super focused on putting my career first. And after becoming a believer, it was very interesting how some shifts started to happen. And this was when I met my husband-to-be was in 2001. We got married in 2002 and started having kids in 2005. And just the slow shift of not making art the number one thing in my life, but making it number 2, 3, 4. I mean, not necessarily a hierarchy in numbers. I shouldn't say it that way, but more of I don't know how else to describe it, but less of a priority, less of an idol, I'll say. It had been an idol for me, for sure. I really thought, well, I need to be able to make it as an artist. I put all this time and effort into my training, told my family this was what I was going to do. They all got behind me, and it became a false idol, really. And slowly over time, it shifted into its correct place. And that's where more blessing came. It was no longer, no longer felt like it was my taskmaster. Instead, it felt like a blessing to be able to go to the studio and to ask the Holy Spirit as I was working. So it's interesting how sometimes work, because I see my painting not as a hobby or as an activity, but those are worthwhile as well. But for me, it was my career, it was my work. And so watching how God could partner with me in my work became very interesting. Yeah.
Now, what about you, Alice? How does your faith play out in your art?
Well, similarly, in graduate school for me, my future plans were all centered around art. And it was not about family. It was not about meeting anyone to get married. It was have invested all this time. I'm going to make it as an artist. I wanted to go to London and I had this whole plan. And I think it's important to plan. I think it's important to think and ask God for wisdom and inspiration for where He wants us to go. And then, like Deidre says, He will guide and direct where He wants us to be, as long as we're receptive to that. So my faith was definitely always important. I had grown up in a Christian family, but my art was really more important. And so that drove my decision making, even to the point where I almost didn't even want to get married. Like, I had met my husband in 2002, around the same time, and so I was really questioning what I wanted. But even with ceramics, because I was a ceramics major, I was a ceramics professor, I've just found God opening doors for where He wanted me to be. I taught at Roberts Wesleyan College for about 4 years before we moved to Boston, and that was the only ceramics program at a Christian college in Rochester, and that was my job. I thought, what a blessing, what an answer to prayer. And it was right out of graduate school, and it's very kind of unheard of, but just God's continued blessing there. And then meeting and kind of reconnecting with more people in Boston after we moved here, and just continuing to just work and focus on my ceramics. But it wasn't until I went to Boston Trinity Academy as a teacher that I really felt God really molding His path for me, because I really wasn't going to teach at a middle school and high school. I wanted to stay in the college level. But I love teaching at Boston Trinity Academy, and I love being able to work with kids and help them find their artistic voice and kind of help mentor alongside them and encourage them in their work. And I just find inspiration in God just reveals himself in so many different ways.
Yes.
And there's an urge as an artist to make, and there's things that come up, like really simple things. I think it was Preparó, the painter, the French painter, says, blessed are those who find the beauty in the mundane.
Yeah.
And there's just beauty all around us, and I feel like my job as a teacher is to help our students see the beauty in the things all around them and not to miss those things, but knowing that that's inspiration, it's beauty from God, and helping us kind of see that.
Yeah. There's a verse of the Bible that I used in the introduction, Ephesians 2:10, that talks about how we are God's workmanship, created for good works in Christ Jesus. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, because it says, right, that those works that he created for us, right, were done ahead of, even before he knew you, Deidre, before you knew him. So do you feel that way? I want to kind of get your thoughts on that verse.
Yes. And so it's such a privilege to be involved in a creative pursuit on a regular basis, because you really do get to know and understand more about God. So even just, looking, for me, I'm a painter, okay? So when I look at a blank canvas, I have to decide, how am I going to approach this new project, and what is the outcome that I want? And one of the first questions I ask myself is, where do I draw the horizon line? So that ties in perfectly with Genesis.
Yeah.
God created the divisions between land and air, and then he created land masses and ocean, the vault of the sky, the vault below of the deep. It's just so, the first verb in Genesis is he created. And so we get to really understand more about God and his character by being creators too. And everybody is creative. We're all made in his image, and so we all are creative in all kinds of things that we do. But it's really fun. I feel really privileged and honored that he chose to give me this particular gift that I can use to bless others, right? So it's an act of service. It's another part of being an artist. I feel it's an act of service. Like you were just talking about, Alice, that it's kind of one of our jobs could be to help people see the beauty in the mundane. And I love that. And another one might be to inspire others or help you see something in a new light. And I think God's Word does that too. So, those are some of the things that I think God teaches me through making art.
Yeah. What about for you, Alice? What about this idea of you were created for good works, kind of, before you were even born, right?
Yeah. Well, similar to what Deidre was saying, we're made in the image of God, and God is a creator, and therefore we can create. And I tell that to my students when they say, I can't do this, I can't do art. Like, yes, you can. And I said, God is a creator, you are made in God's image, therefore you are a creator too. And Deidre, we've taught a little bit together, kind of side by side, and I heard Deidre say once, that little voice inside you that says that you can't do this, don't listen to that voice.
Yeah.
It's just something like that. Yeah. And it's true, don't listen to that voice.
That's right.
Because there's so many opportunities and things that you could accomplish just by saying yes and just trying. Because a blank piece of paper, a blank canvas can be intimidating.
Yeah.
But so what?
Right.
Just try.
Yeah.
Especially if you're just by yourself and you don't want to show people your artwork at first. You can kind of just slowly work on it on your own. But it's such a boost of confidence for people, and they don't think that they can create something they really can. And everyone has a different voice. Like I have a different voice than Deidre. But even within the medium of painting, so I've been painting lately, you could give Deidre and I the same photograph, or that we could set up our easels in the same place. We are going to have a different painting.
Yes.
And the same materials. And that's what's lovely and beautiful about it. We have a different perspective and a different thing to see in the world around us.
I had a couple of thoughts as you were talking. First, I wanted to get your thoughts on this idea, because often people, will look, even myself, right, will look at a piece of art and think, oh my God, or something else, just, or the creative, impetus in people. And they say to themselves, oh, I have no creativity in me. I can't do, X, Y, and Z. I'm just not a creative person. What are your thoughts on that? I would love to hear that, especially for anybody in the audience who's, watching the program and they think that they don't have any creative gifts.
Oh. I hope we can help them see. See the light. Because we obviously we are made in God's image, and we all create at different times and places in our lives. And so I think what can happen that tells people that they can't do it is maybe they weren't as fortunate as Alice and I to have an art teacher who loved us. And maybe they had either a music or art or some other teacher that might have squelched, or another adult figure in their life that squelched their creativity. And I think that's where that comes from. Or it could be the enemy's voice. Or it could be a combination of things. But I think that all children, if you give them crayons or clay or cooking things to cook with or a musical instrument, they pick it up and start playing. And I think play is the spirit behind creativity, is being open to curiosity and play. And if anybody comes against that, then it can start to make you feel like, oh, then maybe that's not my gift, or it's not okay, or it's a waste of time, or it's a waste of materials, or whatever it is. I just hope that we can encourage people to not listen to that voice and instead listen to God's voice. But I don't know what you might want to contribute to that.
Yeah, well, definitely the curious component of it, I think, is so important to pursue. But it could be any medium. It doesn't have to be the visual arts. It could be drama. It could be music. It could be the culinary arts. It could be floral arranging. But we have hands and we have a voice, and we can see. And even if you don't have all those three things, you can, a sense of smell. Like if you have hands to make things or a voice to sing, or you can even just appreciate the art too. I think that's a really important place to start with. But the curiousness, I think we don't want to hinder people or be overly judgmental, and just let people start and try. One of the things I find interesting too in the past decade or so is with the internet, people are a lot more free with their advice and suggestion and tutorials on how to do things.
True.
When I was in graduate school, I'm not sure if anyone who's watching would know this, but I was for ceramics, and people did not share their glaze recipes. You did not really share your ceramic. It was almost like the Renaissance, right? Like at that time, you did not show people how you did your technique because that was yours. And yes, we do work really hard on what we try to make and accomplish. But there's such generosity now that people have at their fingertips for people to learn different things. I think is awesome. And I think it's important if especially as believers, not to be stingy with those things. But if we feel that joy of creating and making, we would want other people to have that same experience too.
That's at least one of the positive things I think about the internet and having access to YouTube videos, right? That there's a lot that you can learn how to do, and people, sort of have classes and instructions on how to do different things related to art or anything else, math, science, languages, what have you. So at least that's one good thing that we can talk about that's positive. Tell me, how hard is it to be an artist today, to make a living as an artist today? Deidre, you're your career is as an artist.
Yeah, and so I'm a studio artist, and I work in a traditional medium, which is paintings on canvas. And I sell the paintings, I sell prints of my paintings, and then I also make gift-size items from the images on the paintings. And so I have sort of 3 tiers of kind of like a deliverables, you might call them in the business world. And so I can make a living as an artist. I've been doing it for 8 years part-time. This is my 9th year in business, full-time though, now. And so once I made that shift into full-time, I've noticed a growth, which is great. But I've had a lot of mentors, and I'm part of a Christian mentoring artist group called the Thriving Christian Artists, which I would recommend to anybody watching. Matt Tommy is the leader of that program. It's easy to find online. It's wonderful. But it's a business. You have to think about it as a business. And so if you are uncomfortable with that, there are ways around it, but it's better if you can kind of come at it as realizing that I'm making something for others, and therefore there's an exchange for that. So for me, making a living as an artist, I'm not, so I'm in a family, married with a spouse, and we support 2 kids, both from my husband's income and my income. Right. And so I'm not just making a living to cover all of us, nor am I just covering myself, but it's combined in a household. And I think that going forward in the 21st century, it's even easier now. So when I started, it was very hard. We didn't have the, we had the internet, but it wasn't the same as it is now. I couldn't bring up my phone and take pictures wherever I was. I had to take pictures and then have them developed. So there were a lot of expensive barriers to making a living as an artist, as a business person now that are broken down. So I would recommend it to people who are thinking about it for themselves, or if you have a family member who's thinking about doing it, I would encourage you, because everything in the digital age today is visual. So artwork is now on our phones. It's in our pockets all the time. It's on our screens. And so the digital world is growing by leaps and bounds, and we need artists. We need designers. So I think it's a growing way to make a living.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what about you, Alice?
Yeah. So I started out selling pottery, and people don't want to spend as much on a ceramic cup as they would on a painting. Even if it takes, or a teapot, like let's say for example, it would probably take me from start to finish like a month and a half for you to make it, and then it has to dry, then you have to fire it, then you have to wash it, maybe do some painting, glazing it, and then fire it again, and then it might break. So there's like, so it's a different kind of making process. And there's also, depending on the medium that you use, there are different kind of tiers of fine art and what people are willing to spend on that. So you also have to think, is this something that I can make a living off of? And if you can, there are different ways that you can kind of go about that, whether it's gallery representation or it's doing art shows. So you have to definitely do your research to know which art shows to be a part of, or there will be also call for entries. So it could be open. Sometimes they're invitational shows, which is excellent, great opportunity too, because it's more selective. But they're also call for entries. It could be anything: watercolor, drawing, painting, charcoal, pastel, sculpture, ceramics, just depending on the area. Sometimes they're specific to the region that you live in. So a lot of art journals will have at the very back, if you're interested in looking at those, you can just see call for entries, and there are different deadlines and specifications. And those are really good ways to get yourself out there, especially as a new artist. But to make it as a living, I've never done that on my own. Teaching was always a part of that. And I think it's important too for health insurance too. I mean, that's not why I ever went into teaching. I went into teaching because I love teaching, and I love sharing what I know with people and helping them go beyond where I was at their age. That's my whole point of teaching, is to teach people so they go beyond where I am even now. That's my hope. But it's not easy, but it's not impossible. And it just depends on what kind of lifestyle you want too.
There's that.
So if you have, but there, I would say it's important just to, as a Christian, seek God's will, like where He wants you, what He's calling you to do, opening doors and opportunities, and not to force it. I think that's really important, because He gives us gifts, He gives us passions for things, and that's not in vain. But I think how we use it, and if it's an idol, then maybe God doesn't open those doors, or things like that. And I think if we're really smart about how we use the abilities and gifts He's given to us in a generous way, and for His glory, ultimately, not for ours, for His glory, then I think He will do wonderful things with that. But again, similarly, I'm a full-time art teacher. My husband he works full time, and we're raising 3 children. So I could not on my own do this.
Right. Right.
But it brings me such joy to do this. It's part of who I am. So, but I think it also feeds my work too when I teach. So in a way, it is, it's part of my living.
Yeah.
It's part of my living.
Now, let me ask each of you, and this may be something, someone in our audience may have encountered when they were young. Can you think back to any sort of negative experiences that made you rethink whether this was the path for you? Did you have doubts? Did you ever doubt yourself? Is this really, for you, Alice, you grew up, as a Christian, is this really the path that God has for me? Is this the way I should go? And I know for you, you became a Christian a little bit later, but did you ever have any moments of doubt?
Yeah. When I went into graduate school, because 100 people apply for the program, and they choose maybe 9 or thereabouts. And as we have friends and family that are cheerleaders and are encouraging, oh, you'll get in. Oh, you'll get in. I'm like, you don't know if I will. But they meant every good intention by that. I remember being in graduate, before I got accepted into the program RIT, I was just on my hands and knees in my bedroom and like, God, please, Lord Jesus, I just want to get into this program. If this is not where you want me to be, please make that clear. But I really, really, really want this. And I got in. And it was awesome. It was, and it was, but I also felt God leading me that way. I really felt he just brought the right people to ask the right questions and to just give a little bit of a nudge. But I think as believers, if we are open and we're in constant communication with God throughout the day, he will reveal those things to us, and it will be pretty clear. I've found that in my experience. When I was a graphic design major in college, and I wasn't really as excited about the meeting at all, like moving text around in pictures, and it just was not fun. I wanted a paintbrush in my hand. I wanted clay in my hand. But that was, and that's going to be, but for someone else, they might love that, but that's just not who I am. So I felt God saying, this is not what I want you to do.
Now, what about you, Deirdre? Were there any moments where you thought, maybe this is not what I'm supposed to be doing with my life?
No. I've always known, and I've been so stubborn too. I think that God gave me kind of a gift of hard-headedness, because this is where I am in my lane. But I will talk about rejection, and when there was a day when I felt really down. I didn't doubt that God wanted me to be an artist, but I felt questioning whether God was going to advance me. So I had a tiny studio for years and years, and I always coveted larger studio spaces. It's funny how like you just have a little bit and you just want more, And this was after I was a believer too, so I'm just putting it out there, being really honest. Like I was coveting larger studios. I saw older artists who, were able to do larger pieces and have clients come in and have a couch, and a place for them to feel comfortable. And I just didn't have that. I had a space that was about the size, this corner here, and I just felt like, when am I going to get a larger space? I tried and tried and tried. And it's hard in Boston to find studio space. A lot of buildings have closed. So this place in the same building that I was in opened up, and it wasn't clear whether it was going to become a studio or another commercial office or something, because it's in a mixed-use building. So I called the landlord and I asked him, are you going to make that into a studio? And if you do, can I have it? Is there any way that you could put me on a wait list? And he laughed at me and said, no, sorry. No, we're using it for commercial use. And so I said, okay, thank you very much. And I hung up, and then I got on my knees and cried. I sobbed. And I thought, he just laughed at me. And I've been a faithful tenant for so long. I just felt so dismissed, rejected, not taken seriously. And I thought, what if I was a man? Would he have treated me differently? You know, really. And so it was very upsetting. But 3 years later, I kept praying, and God opened a new space for me. And he led me to a website, and I found a place. And when I got there, I realized this is why God had me wait. It was this space that he had for me.
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage anyone else who's watching and listening to keep waiting on the Lord.
Yeah.
There might be a better place.
Yeah.
And it has been a better place. It's been more life-giving.
Yeah.
It's not just a larger space, but it came with a lot of amenities, and it was affordable.
Yeah.
Whereas the other space might not have been as affordable or had the other things that God had for me.
Yeah.
So rejection can feel really, it can feel very bitter.
And I want to dig into that a little bit because
Yeah.
two things that you said, and I want to ask both of you this question. It's about, how do you deal with rejection and also being a female artist, right? So I want to talk about rejection for you, Alice, as an artist, ceramicist, did you ever experience rejection? And also you might want to provide for the audience, how do you deal with rejection? Because, right, as artists, as creators, you put your heart and soul into a work, and you might submit it somewhere, and it's, writers experience this all the time, right? They write a manuscript, and it gets rejected, and rejection, right? You have to have some kind of tough skin to be able to pick yourself up, right? Yeah. Through every rejection, it's like a punch in the face or the gut. And so how do you, I'm going to ask Alice now, how do you counsel someone, and how have you yourself dealt with rejection?
I think with training as an artist, starting really early in high school and even in college, critiques help inform our work. And we have to, like Deidre said, you have to kind of be a little stubborn, not listen to that feedback, but also just take it in, think about it, and trust that people are giving us advice, and we can choose to take it or not. But that's also someone's opinion. Right. So a curator for a museum, that might be their taste, that might be their opinion. It doesn't make my work less valid. And sometimes they're looking for a specific thing. Or they already have an artist whose work maybe looks just like mine. And there are a myriad of reasons why. And I think taking it personally doesn't help us grow as an artist. If anything, it would probably make us more discouraged to even want to move forward, and that's not the type of people that God has called us to be. We move forward and we persevere. But the critique is so important. Having it in graduate school, oh gosh, they were brutal. And I went to a Christian school for undergrad, but I also went to just a state university school for graduate school. And I loved all my studio mates, but my professors were really hard. But it's a way to prepare, and also just give me the vocabulary that I need and the questions that I would just continue to take with me. Because when I'm in my studio, I still ask myself the same questions that my professors would ask me. They're in my head in a way. But I also had a professor in graduate school who kept every rejection letter, everything. She has a whole file of every place she applied to that she got rejected from. But again, part of it's God's ultimate orchestration of our life. He has a perfect design and plan and purpose, and he's he's preparing us to do good works, and he has people lined up in our path that he wants us to meet with and work with. And maybe if I was rejected from some show or something, there's a humbling element to that too, which I think is really important as an artist and as just a person in general. To have a little bit of a reality check. And we make our work for us. Ultimately, I make my work for me. Unless there's a commission, then there's a little bit of exchange. But I don't try to make work for the praise of others. And so if someone's not going to praise my work, I didn't do that for that. That wasn't my objective. But we do care a lot about what we do. We pour ourselves into our work, and we think what we do is good. And so I think that's ultimately that's what matters, is that I'm proud of what I've put forward, that I gave it my best. And if I did do that, then what other people have to say is what they say.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
What about being a female in this space? Is it, any barriers to being a female as an artist, right? Traditionally, way back when, right?
Yes.
Most of the artists were male, and female artists did not get the same type of recognition, or even, just people didn't know as much about them.
That's right.
Is that still continue in the art world, or not really?
It's a really good question. I love reading articles about this, and I took a course in college about feminism and art history and women in the arts. And so, yeah, I mean, as we know, it's not an equal world, and it's not always fair. But I will say it's probably the best time in history so far. And I do feel taken seriously by my art gallerist, by my art consultant company that I work with, and by the clients who buy my work. And anybody who questions that based on gender just needs to, get with the program. Because I know that God values me as a creator, regardless of my gender. And in fact, he probably uses some of who he's made me to be as a feminine person, a woman, in the way that I approach my work. And so, I try to focus on that. But I think it is,
Okay. What about you?
It's a journey.
I think I agree with Deidre. This is probably the best time for opportunities for women to be artists. There are more females in the art program that I was in graduate school and in undergrad. There are just more women.
Wow.
And that might be because maybe there's some families that aren't supportive of a son moving into the art world. Like, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to make money? And I think I know for a fact that there were a few students who could only minor in art at college where I went to school because their parents were not supportive of them as an art major. They were just concerned that they weren't going to make enough money having a career. I found, this was early 2000s that I was in graduate school for ceramics. I felt like there was more masculine kind of weight. There's more, it was more predominantly male in ceramics. Bags of clay materials are 50 pounds. Big sculpture, moving that around. And I made small cups with screen printed flowers on them. I mean, that was just who I was, and that was my visual language, and that's what I'm making. I think some people maybe wouldn't have taken me as seriously because I didn't make these really big kind of statement pieces. And I was never in that competition of who can throw the biggest bowl on the wheel. Like, I never wanted to be a part of that. I didn't care.
Yeah.
I was also just didn't have the strength for it. But what am I going to do with this big pot? A big bowl, I just didn't care. But I felt like at times and at least that, because there's a specific skill involved, outside of the creative part. Like, there's a technical skill throwing on the wheel that you had to be strong and you had to be this big kind of presence in the studio. But that really was not something when I was really moving into graduate school that had gone by the wayside. That was something that was decades previous.
But I will say it's interesting that both you and I were inspired by men. Your father, and for me it was the artist who we went to visit. And so, props to the guys, for modeling for us and for encouraging us.
And I want to say something about that too. My ceramics professor in college, Gary Baxter, he was the most gentle, patient man, witty, and just such a wonderful Christian and wonderful human being. But he just taught me patience in the studio too. And with clay, things break, things fall. You work on something for months and it could crack, and it's like it's on the floor and there are tears. But he just would keep moving on, like, oh, that's too bad. Okay. I mean, he cared very much about his work and took his work seriously, but there was never a tantrum. There was never an ego or any kind of meanness or, I don't know, overly testosterone kind of laden space. But so thankful for my dad, absolutely. And just the encouraging me, and your teacher does to encourage us to move forward with pursuing art. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me, Alice, because I know you're transitioning from ceramics to oils. Is that correct? And so, and I know you have a little show and tell about a recent art piece that you did. You want to
I did this
show the
portrait
audience and tell us a little bit about it?
Giovanni's grandson, Gio. You can see this. This is a portrait of Gio that I promised. I just want the practice. I think ultimately I just wanted the practice. So I had a great painting professor in college. I only took one painting class. It was just painting 101 kind of. But I learned everything. Not everything, but I learned so much. He really prepared me that I just wanted to pursue it. And I did it a little bit. So I feel like I still am a potter in a way. Yeah. But I love painting and drawing. I feel like I'm an artist. Yeah. I'm not a studio artist right now because I feel like that's not what I'm able to do full time. It's a funny thing with my identity as an artist. It took me a long time to even say I was a potter. Like, what does that mean? Do I have to, in order for me to say I'm a potter, I'm a ceramicist, do I have to make my money doing that? Do I spend all my time doing that? Yeah. What constitutes that I can say that I'm that, right? Because I went to graduate school for it, but not everyone who goes to school for something pursues that career. Yeah. So it took me a long time to be able to say that, yes, I am an artist, I'm a ceramicist.
Do you call yourself that if you're making a living from it?
Yeah. Right. Am I allowed to do that? And I think probably the audience would say the same thing too. Like, they love taking photographs. Are they a photographer? Yeah. Or can I only call myself that if I'm making money at that, or if I have to put that on my taxes or my income or something, right? But for me, I would just say I'm an artist. It's easier for me to kind of have that umbrella. But there are different seasons in my life, and I feel like God's leading me to be able to paint more and draw more because that's where my family is. I'm able to be more present with my family, being able to do that and pursue that. Yeah.
This does not look like a practice to me. But of course, I'm not looking at it through an artist's perspective or through with an artist's eye.
It's gorgeous.
Discerning eye. Thank you. But tell me a little bit, because I think, Alice, you've been painting a variety of different things, so not necessarily one theme to your art. But Deidre, I've seen your art, and it seems as though there's a common theme, a common thread throughout your painting. So what is that? Tell the audience.
Sure. So a lot like Alice, I went to art school and studied how to paint different things in the studio, and also I got involved in plein air painting later. Plein air is when you paint outside. It's a French term for painting outside. So I really got into that and started to do more and more work based on the landscapes around Massachusetts. And because I grew up here and my family goes back several generations here, I felt like that would be meaningful coming from who I am and what I bring. What's been a big part of my life is being here. And so I just like to explore the different coastal areas of Massachusetts and paint from that. And so the series that I've been working on for the past 9 years is all based on Massachusetts landscapes, and I'm not running out of any inspiration. I'm just constantly inspired because we have the seasons, there are changes in the landscape, and as we know, the coastline is eroding, and so it's interesting. That's an interesting component for me to think about as I paint. Like, it might not look like this in the future, and so I'm recording and documenting. And there's a lot that goes on in my mind as I paint, but it's also partnering with God.
And we'll have a link in the program for the audience to be able to take a look at your art online as well.
So that's what I work on. Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Last thoughts, any advice for the audience, anything you want to impart before we close tonight?
I think, interestingly, even though I went to school for art, ceramics, I became a better artist when I started teaching because I had to really think about what does art mean at a really basic level, and how do I explain that to someone who's in 7th grade? To think about how do you build a composition. I think ultimately when you're thinking about an artwork, whether it's music, I guess, I'm not a musician, but whether it's music, but I'd say a canvas or a sculpture, composition is key. You could have a beautifully painted subject, but if the composition isn't well balanced, and it could even be like a loose brushstroke kind of thing. It doesn't have to be tight, refined, photogenic, absolutely realistic or anything like that. But if the composition's not there, it's not going to be a great work of art. It's just, and I think that was my first thing. But teaching, I feel God's just led me exactly where He wants me to be and to teach. He's even said, even though that's not what I wanted, I'm glad and thankful that He pushed me there and brought me there, because we don't always know what He has for us. We don't always think is the best, but I feel like this is exactly where God has me and wants me. And He's fueled my work so that even in the place I didn't think that I could be inspired, but teaching has been probably paramount, because I have to talk about the elements of art, the principles of design, thinking about it from a really basic perspective, to be able to ask myself the right questions and also being in practice, I think is important for my students to see me contributing to the field, that I'm not just there to teach and go home, but that's part of who I am, and that it can be something that they can pursue too.
Yeah. And what about you, Deidre? Any last thoughts to the audience?
I think for the audience who may be saying, well, I'm not a visual artist and I don't actually know that much about visual art, so I found it's interesting, having come from a secular life and then a Christian life, that a lot of Christians don't know that much about visual art. Everybody knows their favorite worship songs and worship artists and music, and even movies. But when it comes to visual art, people feel a little bit like a deer in the headlights. So if that's you, I would suggest find a friend who knows something and go to a museum together and let them talk your ear off. Chat it up about one particular painting that stands out to you, that you like for some reason. You can't figure out why, but you can't take your eyes off of it. And talk with them about it. And maybe not even with somebody that knows something. Maybe it's fun to just banter together about work that you don't know anything about, you don't know the artist, but you just can't keep your eyes off of this particular painting of a basket of fruit or something, or a crazy abstract. And so don't worry about it. If you don't have the language or you don't have the right words, it's okay. And you mentioned appreciation, curiosity. Just approach it that way and ask God to reveal things to you when you look at art. Ask God, what do you want me to see at the museum today? It might be something really different than you didn't think you would even find at a museum. Maybe it's musical instruments that you might find at the museum that you find compelling. But I would just recommend, give it a try and open that part of yourself. And you never know, it might cause you to want to pick up tools yourself or just appreciate and be curious. And that can be so much fun and so fulfilling too.
That is really great advice, Deirdre. Alice, thank you both so much for coming on the program. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope you have enjoyed it too. We serve a creative God who created the heavens and the earth. And He created us to be also creators and creative. And so I hope that if you're an artist or a musician or any other type of creative work, that you will be encouraged, because God is in those details for your life. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next time.